November 21st, 1944, late afternoon, Hürtgen Forest, Germany. Obergefreiter Klaus Weber crouched in a concrete bunker and examined the American weapon his squad had captured that morning. The submachine gun looked like something stamped from scrap metal in a garage workshop, crude welds, rough edges, a wire stock that folded like a cheap tool. The whole assembly felt lighter than his MP40 by at least a kilogram. Weber had been a machinist before the war. He understood manufacturing. His MP40 was precision engineering, machined steel components, careful assembly, skilled workers spending days on each weapon. This American gun, he could see where sheet metal had been pressed and welded together. No machining except the barrel and bolt. Maybe a few hours of work total. He estimated the cost. 50 Reichsmarks at most. Probably less. The Americans were issuing these to regular infantry like they were disposable. His sergeant, Feldwebel Ernst Hoffmann, took the weapon and checked the action. Smooth, clean. He pulled a magazine from the dead American's ammunition pouch and loaded it. 30 rounds of .45 caliber ammunition. Hoffmann stepped outside the bunker and fired a short burst into the trees. The gun worked perfectly. Controllable recoil, steady rate of fire. No malfunctions despite being dragged through mud for 3 days. Hoffmann fired another burst, then another. He emptied the magazine and looked at Weber. "Mein Gott," Hoffmann whispered. "They can make 1,000 of these for every one of ours." How had the Americans created a submachine gun that cost less than a week's wages but performed as well as Germany's precision-engineered MP40? What did this crude, ugly weapon reveal about American industrial philosophy? And what would it mean for German soldiers fighting in close-quarters forest combat when their enemy could equip every infantryman with automatic weapons that Americans treated as disposable tools? The Hürtgen Forest stretched 50 square miles along the German-Belgian border. Dense stands of fir trees rising 75 to 100 feet above the forest floor. Thick underbrush, ravines, narrow trails barely wide enough for vehicles. Terrain that made conventional warfare nearly impossible. American forces entered the forest in mid-September 1944. Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges commanded the First Army, pushing toward the Rohr River and the Rhine beyond. The Hürtgen sat directly in his path. Military planners assumed the forest could be cleared quickly. A few days, perhaps a week of fighting. They were catastrophically wrong. The terrain negated every American advantage. Artillery couldn't penetrate the thick canopy. Air support was useless. Pilots couldn't see targets through the trees. Tanks bogged down in mud or through tracks on narrow trails. Radio communications failed in the dense forest. Supply trucks couldn't reach forward units. Wounded men had to be carried miles through undergrowth to reach aid stations. The Germans defended brilliantly. Concrete bunkers built into the hillsides. Interlocking fields of fire along the few open trails. Mines everywhere. Shoe mines, topped mines, shoe mines, buried in paths and foxholes. Tripwires connected to artillery shells. Booby traps in abandoned positions. And the combat was intimate, brutal, personal. Visibility in the forest rarely exceeded 50 yards. Often it was less. 10 yards, 5 yards, sometimes just the length of a rifle. Firefights happened at ranges where men could see each other's faces, where grenades were more effective than rifles, where automatic weapons meant survival. The 9th Infantry Division attacked first in September, then the 28th Division in November, the 4th Infantry Division, the 8th Division, the 1st Division. Units fed piecemeal into the forest and chewed to pieces. Entire battalions destroyed. Regiments reduced to company strength. Companies down to platoon size. By November 1944, American casualties exceeded 30,000 men. The forest had consumed entire divisions and barely moved the front line 5 miles. The M3 submachine gun arrived in Europe in mid-1944. American soldiers called it the grease gun because it looked like the mechanic's tool used to lubricate vehicles. Some called it the plumber's nightmare. Others called it the cake decorator. Nobody called it beautiful. The weapon had been designed in late 1942 by George Hyde of General Motors Inland Division. The U.S. Army needed a cheap replacement for the Thompson submachine gun. The Thompson was magnificent, precision machined, beautifully finished, deadly accurate. It was also expensive. Each Thompson cost $200. In 1942 dollars, that was equivalent to buying a good used car. The Army couldn't afford to equip every soldier who needed a submachine gun with a Thompson. Not when American factories needed to produce millions of weapons for a global war. So Hyde designed something completely different. The M3 was built almost entirely from stamped sheet metal. The receiver was two pressed steel halves welded together. The barrel was the only component that required precision machining. The bolt needed machining as well, but even that was simplified. The magazine housing, trigger group, sights, all stamped metal. Spot welding held everything together. The wire stock telescoped and could be removed completely. When removed, the stock doubled as a cleaning rod. One end was threaded to accept a bore brush. The gun had no selector switch because it only fired full automatic, no semi-auto mode. That saved manufacturing time and complexity. Total parts count, fewer than 50 components. The Thompson had over 100. The German MP40 had more than 70. Production time per weapon, approximately 5 hours. The Thompson required 40 hours. Even the simplified Thompson M1A1 required 20 hours. Cost per unit, $20.94. Less than 1/10 the cost of a Thompson. Roughly the price of 2 good restaurant meals in 1943. The U.S. Army initially designated the M3 as limited standard, meaning it would supplement rather than replace the Thompson. But by late 1944, M3s were arriving faster than Thompsons. Guide Lamp Division of General Motors produced over 600,000 M3s between 1943 and 1945. The weapon was designed to be disposable. If it broke, throw it away and get a new one. The Army didn't even manufacture spare parts initially. They assumed soldiers would simply discard broken weapons and requisition replacements. That philosophy horrified soldiers in combat. Nobody wanted to throw away their weapon in enemy territory, so field armorers fabricated parts and kept the grease guns running, despite the manufacturer's intentions. Klaus Weber's MP40 represented an entirely different manufacturing philosophy. The Maschinen Pistole 40 had been designed in 1938 by Heinrich Vollmer. It evolved from the MP38, which itself descended from the MP36. Each generation refined the previous model. The MP40 incorporated stamped steel to reduce costs, a revolutionary approach for German weapons manufacturing in 1940. But the MP40 still required significant skilled labor. The receiver was stamped steel. Yes, but it needed careful assembly. The trigger group was complex. The folding stock required precision work to function smoothly. The magazine housing had to be machined to exact tolerances, or feeding problems occurred. German workers at Irma Werke and other factories spent days assembling each MP40. Quality control was rigorous. Each weapon was test-fired before acceptance. The result was a submachine gun that worked reliably and felt solid in the hands. The MP40 fired 9mm parabellum ammunition at 500 to 550 rounds per minute. Effective range was approximately 100 meters. Magazine capacity was 32 rounds. Weight was 8.85 pounds empty. It was an excellent weapon. German soldiers trusted it. Officers and NCOs carried it as their primary arm. Paratroopers preferred it over rifles. Tank crews relied on it for close defense. But it was expensive. Not as expensive as the Thompson, certainly. German records don't provide exact manufacturing costs, but estimates suggest each MP40 cost roughly equivalent to $100 to $150 in American currency, 5 to 7 times more than the M3 grease gun, and production was slow. Irma Werke produced approximately 1.1 million MP40s between 1940 and 1945. That sounds impressive until compared to American production of submachine guns. The United States produced over 1.5 million Thompsons and over 600,000 M3s, combined total, over 2 million submachine guns in roughly the same time frame. The difference wasn't just quantity, it was philosophy. German engineers designed weapons to last decades. American engineers designed weapons to win this war, right now, at the lowest possible cost. Private First Class Robert Keller carried his M3 through the Hürtgen Forest in late November 1944. He was a replacement in Company E, 110th Infantry Regiment, 28th Division. He'd been in combat for 3 weeks. His unit had lost 70% of its strength. Keller had started with an M1 Garand rifle. Good weapon. Accurate. Reliable. Completely wrong for the Hürtgen Forest. The Garand was designed for open-field combat at ranges of 200 to 500 yards. In the forest, you never saw the enemy beyond 50 yards. Usually it was more like 10 yards. By the time you aimed a rifle, the enemy had already fired a burst from a submachine gun or thrown a grenade. After his squad leader was killed, Keller picked up the man's M3. The weapon felt wrong, too light, too crude, like a toy compared to the Garand. But in his first firefight with the grease gun, Keller understood why tank crews and paratroopers loved it. German infantry had appeared from a bunker 30 yards ahead. 4 men with rifles and an MP40. Keller's squad scattered for cover. The German with the MP40 fired a burst that tore through the underbrush. Keller raised his M3 and squeezed the trigger. The grease gun fired at 450 rounds per minute. That was slow for a submachine gun. The Thompson fired 700 rounds per minute. The MP40 fired 550. But slow was controllable. Keller could fire short bursts of 3 or 4 rounds. The .45 caliber bullets hit like sledgehammers. 2 Germans went down immediately. The others retreated into the bunker. Keller's squad moved forward, threw grenades through the bunker's firing ports and cleared it. Total time elapsed, maybe 30 seconds. That night, Keller cleaned his M3. The weapon was filthy from being dragged through mud. He expected problems. But the grease gun's simple design and generous tolerances meant it kept working. Dirt that would jam a Thompson just fell out of the M3's open action. The gun didn't care about mud or debris. Over the next week, Keller learned other advantages. The wire stock was actually useful. You could collapse it and move through tight spaces, then extend it for firing. The low rate of fire meant his 30-round magazine lasted longer in a firefight. And when he ran out of ammunition, the magazine could be reloaded faster than the Thompson's complex drum magazine. He kept the M3 for the rest of the war. Feldwebel Ernst Hoffmann had been fighting Americans since Normandy. He'd seen their weapons: Garands, carbines, Browning, automatic rifles, Thompsons, all quality firearms, some better than German equivalents, some worse, but all clearly products of serious military engineering. Then in November 1944, his unit captured several M3 submachine guns from American casualties in the Hürtgen Forest. Hoffmann examined them with growing disbelief. The weapons looked like they'd been assembled in a garage. Rough welds. No finish except paint. Stamped metal everywhere. The wire stock felt flimsy. The sights were crude. Just a simple aperture rear sight and a post front sight. No adjustments. No precision. Hoffmann field stripped one of the captured M3s. The internal parts were equally crude. The bolt was a simple cylinder with a fixed firing pin. The recoil springs rode on guide rods. The trigger mechanism was basic. Everything was designed for maximum simplicity and minimum manufacturing time. He called over his squad's armorer, Gefreiter Hans Becker. Becker had worked in a machine shop before the war. Hoffmann asked him to estimate production time for the American submachine gun. Becker examined the weapon carefully. He pointed out the stamped components, the spot welds, the minimal machining. 4 hours, he said. Maybe 5 if you include inspection and testing. One semi-skilled worker could make most of the parts. Only the barrel and bolt require a machinist. Hoffmann compared that to his MP40. Days of work. Multiple skilled craftsmen, careful assembly, quality control at every stage. Then Becker said something that made Hoffmann's blood run cold. Herr Feldwebel, look at this closely. The Americans designed this weapon to be disposable. See how there are no provisions for repairs? No spare parts that can be easily replaced? They expect soldiers to throw these away when they break. Hoffmann understood immediately. The Americans could afford to build weapons so cheap that soldiers discarded them instead of repairing them. That level of industrial capacity was terrifying. He did some quick mathematics. If each M3 cost 1/10 as much as an MP40 to produce and took 1/5 the time, then American factories could produce 50 M3s for every one MP40 in the same time period, with the same resources. Germany had produced approximately 1 million MP40s over 5 years. If America applied the same resources to M3 production, they could theoretically produce 50 million weapons. The Hürtgen Forest combat reports from November and December 1944 tell a consistent story. Engagements happened at ranges where automatic weapons were decisive. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bosche commanded 2nd Battalion, 121st Infantry Regiment, 8th Division. He wrote extensively about weapons' effectiveness in forest combat. His observations were blunt. Rifles were nearly useless. By the time a soldier aimed and fired a single shot, the enemy had fired an entire burst from a submachine gun. The Garand's 8-round clip wasn't the problem. The problem was that aimed fire took time, and time meant death in close-quarters combat. Submachine guns were king. Thompsons, M3s, MP40s, all dominated firefights at ranges under 50 yards. The soldier who got his submachine gun into action first usually won. Rate of fire mattered less than having automatic fire at all. Grenades were equally important. In bunker fighting, grenades were often the only effective weapon, but getting close enough to throw grenades meant surviving the approach, which required suppressive fire from automatic weapons. The 99th Infantry Division's Combat Observations Report from February 1945 stated it explicitly. The M3 submachine gun is the best weapon we use for patrolling. It can be put into action quickly, and at short ranges is accurate and powerful. Staff Sergeant J.W. Logan of Company D, 101st Infantry Regiment, 26th Division, recommended that every machine gun squad leader carry a submachine gun instead of an M1 rifle. His reasoning was simple. Squad leaders needed to fight their way into position, which meant close combat, which meant automatic fire. Tank crews loved the M3. Sherman tanks came equipped with 5 submachine guns for crew defense. The compact size meant they could be stored inside the cramped interior. The slow rate of fire meant ammunition lasted longer. And if a crew had to abandon a disabled tank, the M3 could be fired from the hip while running. Try that with a Garand. Paratroopers appreciated that the M3 didn't need to be disassembled before jumping. Thompsons had to be partially disassembled, or they'd snag on the parachute harness. The M3's wire stock could be collapsed, and the whole weapon carried in a musette bag. By December 1944, captured M3 submachine guns were circulating through German units in the Hürtgen Forest. Officers examined them. Armorers tested them. Intelligence officers wrote reports. The reports reached higher command levels. Staff officers at LX-14 Corps headquarters reviewed the weapons. They understood immediately what they represented. General der Infanterie Erich Straub commanded LX-14 Corps, which managed German forces in the Hürtgen sector. He read the intelligence reports about American submachine gun production and called a staff meeting. His intelligence officer presented the facts. American factories were producing M3 submachine guns at a rate exceeding 50,000 units per month. That was 600,000 per year. More importantly, production could be scaled rapidly because the design required minimal skilled labor and no special machinery. Any factory with sheet metal presses and welding equipment could produce M3s. Compare that to German production. Irma Werke and other contractors produced approximately 15,000 MP40s per month, maximum. And that rate strained German industrial capacity because skilled workers and machine tools were needed for other weapons. The intelligence officer presented cost analysis. Based on captured documents and interrogation of American prisoners, the M3 cost approximately $20 to manufacture. The equivalent in Reichsmarks was roughly 50. An MP40 cost approximately 150 Reichsmarks to produce 3 times more. But the real shock was labor hours. The M3 required 5 hours of labor per weapon. The MP40 required approximately 20 to 30 hours depending on component availability and workforce skill level. That was a 6-to-1 ratio in labor efficiency. Straub understood the implications. Germany was fighting a war of attrition against enemies who could produce weapons 6 times faster at 1/3 the cost. The mathematics were inexorable. Every German weapon destroyed would be replaced eventually, if at all. Every American weapon destroyed would be replaced immediately, probably with 2 or 3 more weapons, because American production capacity was effectively unlimited. One staff officer suggested that German industry should copy the American approach, design crude, simple weapons that could be produced quickly. Straube shook his head. Germany didn't have the industrial base anymore. Allied bombing had destroyed machine tool factories. Raw materials were scarce. Skilled workers were in the military or dead. Even if Germany wanted to copy American methods, it was too late. The war was lost. It had been lost when Germany failed to knock out American industrial capacity in the first year. Now that capacity was crushing Germany under an avalanche of equipment. Private First Class James Watkins volunteered for a night patrol in early December 1944. His unit, Company F, 22nd Infantry Regiment, 4th Division, needed intelligence on German positions near the town of Grosshau. Watkins carried an M3 grease gun. 6 other men in the patrol carried Garands. The patrol leader, Sergeant Thomas Burke, carried a Thompson. Burke had carried Thompson since Normandy and refused to switch to the grease gun despite its advantages. The patrol moved through the forest at 2300 hours. Moonless night. Temperature just above freezing. Rain dripping through the trees. They advanced slowly, stepping carefully to avoid mines and tripwires. At approximately 0100 hours, they encountered a German patrol. Both groups froze. Range, maybe 20 feet. The Germans had been moving in the opposite direction, along the same trail. 4 men, all carrying rifles except one with an MP40. Burke reacted first. He raised his Thompson and fired. The Thompson's 700 round per minute cyclic rate produced a long burst that emptied half his magazine. Muzzle flash lit the forest like a flashbulb. 3 Germans went down immediately. But the Thompson's high rate of fire meant Burke was out of ammunition. He fumbled for a fresh magazine. The 4th German, the one with the MP40, aimed at Burke. Watkins fired his M3. 4 rounds, controlled burst. The German with the MP40 collapsed. Watkins fired again. 3 more rounds. The German didn't move. Burke got his Thompson reloaded, and the patrol secured the area. All 4 Germans were dead. Burke looked at Watkins. "I saw your muzzle flash. That was only 7 rounds. How'd you do that?" Watkins explained. The grease gun's slow rate of fire, 450 rounds per minute, meant you could fire very short bursts, 3 or 4 rounds, enough to hit the target without wasting ammunition. The Thompson's high rate of fire made short bursts nearly impossible. You'd fire 10 or 12 rounds minimum, even with a quick trigger pull. Burke said nothing, but later that night, Watkins saw him examining one of the captured M3s. The sergeant was reconsidering his loyalty to the Thompson. December 15th, 1944. Near the town of Merode, on the northeastern edge of Hürtgen Forest, Sergeant David Miller led his squad toward a German bunker that had been firing on American positions all morning. The bunker was standard Type 107 construction. Concrete walls, 3 feet thick, machine gun embrasures on the sides, designed to fire into the flanks of attacking infantry. Miller's squad had 8 men. 3 carried M3 submachine guns. 4 carried Garands. 1 carried a Browning automatic rifle. They also had 6 hand grenades and a satchel charge, 20 pounds of dynamite in a canvas bag. The squad approached from the bunker's rear, where there were no firing ports. The Germans inside apparently didn't know they were there. Miller signaled for the Grenadiers to move up. Private Leonard Harris carried an M3 and 6 grenades. He moved forward carefully, staying low. At 10 yards from the bunker, a German sentry appeared from around the corner. The sentry carried a Kar-98 rifle. Harris fired his M3. Short burst. 4 rounds. The sentry collapsed. But the noise alerted the bunker. Germans shouted inside. Someone ran for the machine gun embrasure. Harris threw a grenade through the nearest embrasure. Explosion. Screaming from inside. He threw another grenade. Another explosion. Then he charged to the bunker entrance. A steel door set into the concrete, and threw his remaining grenades inside before anyone could close the door. 3 more explosions shook the bunker. Miller's squad stormed in behind the grenades. Harris led with his M3. The interior was smoke and chaos. 2 Germans were down. 3 more were stumbling, disoriented. Harris fired. Short, controlled bursts. The confined space magnified the sound. The fight lasted maybe 10 seconds. 5 Germans dead. 1 wounded and captured. No American casualties. Miller later wrote in his after-action report, "The M3 submachine gun is ideal for bunker assault. Low rate of fire means you don't waste ammunition. .45 caliber rounds are devastating in confined spaces. Weapon is light enough to move quickly." Oberst Heinrich Meyer commanded a regiment in the 275th Infantry Division, defending the Hürtgen sector. He received reports throughout November and December about American weapons, particularly the new submachine gun. Meyer read the intelligence summaries carefully. The M3 was being issued to an increasing percentage of American infantry. Initial reports suggested only tank crews and specialized units carried them. But by December, regular infantry squads had multiple M3s. Meyer did calculations. If each American infantry company had 30 to 40 submachine guns, and the Americans had roughly equivalent forces to his division deployed in this sector, that meant the Americans had thousands of submachine guns in the Hürtgen Forest alone. Thousands of cheap disposable submachine guns. Weapons that cost less to manufacture than a soldier's winter coat. Meyer compared this to German allocation. His regiment had approximately 150 MP40s distributed among officers, NCOs, and selected infantry. That was all. Everyone else carried bolt-action rifles or machine guns. The Americans were equipping ordinary infantrymen with automatic weapons. Germany equipped only leaders and specialists. The difference in close-quarters combat was decisive. Meyer wrote a report to division headquarters requesting additional MP40s. The response came back within 2 days. None available. Production was prioritized for units on the Eastern Front. Units in the West had to make do with existing allocations. Meyer understood what that meant. His troops were fighting American infantry, who had 3 to 4 times as many automatic weapons. In forest combat, where engagements happened at 20 to 30 yards, the Americans had overwhelming firepower advantage. The only factors keeping German forces competitive were better tactics, better use of terrain, and extensive fortifications. But those advantages eroded daily as American forces learned forest fighting, and as German positions were destroyed by artillery. Meyer's division would hold as long as possible, but the mathematics of firepower were against them. When every American squad had 4 or 5 automatic weapons and every German squad had 1, the outcome was inevitable. Lieutenant Thomas White sat in a command post near Hürtgen in late December and wrote a letter home. He'd been a mechanical engineer before the war. Now he commanded a weapons platoon. He'd been thinking about the M3 grease gun and what it represented. White wrote, "The Germans build weapons like craftsmen building furniture. Every part is carefully made. Everything fits precisely. Their weapons are works of art. We build weapons like Ford builds cars, stamped parts, interchangeable components. Nothing beautiful, just functional. A weapon is a tool to be used and discarded when worn out. The difference tells you everything about how we'll win this war. They can't afford to lose their beautiful weapons. We can afford to lose 10,000 ugly ones and make 10,000 more tomorrow. I've seen German prisoners examine our grease guns. They look horrified. These weapons offend their sense of craftsmanship, but the prisoners are carrying our grease guns, not their MP40s, because they ran out of ammunition for the German guns, and our guns were lying everywhere on the battlefield. That's the whole war in one image." White's observation captured something fundamental. American industrial philosophy prioritized quantity over quality. Not because Americans couldn't build quality, the Thompson proved they could, but because quantity won wars of attrition. The British had learned this with the Sten gun. The Soviets learned it with the PPS-41. Now Americans were proving it with the M3. All 3 weapons looked crude. All 3 worked reliably. All 3 could be produced in numbers that overwhelmed enemy forces. Germany couldn't match this philosophy even if they wanted to. German industrial culture valued precision and craftsmanship. German workers took pride in making quality products that lasted generations. The idea of deliberately building disposable weapons offended German sensibilities, But wars aren't won by sensibilities. They're won by logistics, production, and the mathematics of attrition. Not all American soldiers loved the grease gun initially. Many preferred the Thompson or even the M1 Garand, but as the Hürtgen campaign dragged on, opinions shifted. Corporal Raymond Foster started the battle, carrying a Garand, excellent rifle. 8 rounds of 30-06 ammunition, accurate to 500 yards. Semi-automatic fire meant rapid follow-up shots. Completely wrong for the Hürtgen Forest. Foster traded his Garand for a captured M3. After watching a firefight where submachine guns decided the outcome in seconds, he learned to love the grease gun's quirks. The slow rate of fire that conserved ammunition, the heavy .45 caliber rounds that knocked down targets, the simple construction that meant fewer parts to break. Tank crews universally preferred the M3. Technical Sergeant Russell Spooner, a tank commander, explained why. The grease gun lives in our tank. It's compact enough to not get in the way. It's simple enough that anyone can use it. And if we have to bail out under fire, you can spray bullets while running, without aiming. Try that with a rifle. Paratroopers appreciated different features. Lieutenant James Bradford of the 82nd Airborne noted that the M3 didn't need disassembly before jumps. The Thompson had to be partially taken apart or it would catch on equipment during your exit. The grease gun just folded up and went in a bag. That mattered when you were jumping into enemy territory at night. Medics and support personnel liked the M3 because it was lighter than a rifle and provided close-range protection without requiring extensive training. Combat engineers preferred it for the same reasons. By January 1945, demand for M3s exceeded supply. Units in combat requested more. Replacements asked for them specifically. The ugly duckling weapon had become preferred issue for anyone expecting close combat. The fighting intensified in December as American forces made a final push to secure the Roe River dams. The battles around Merode, Grosshall, and Langway produced some of the highest casualty rates of the entire campaign. On November 29th and 30th, the 1st Infantry Division lost over 300 men in Langway-Merode. German counterattacks destroyed American companies that had taken the villages. Close-quarters combat, house-to-house fighting, ranges measured in feet rather than yards. Survivors reported that automatic weapons made the difference. Companies with higher percentages of M3s and Thompsons suffered lower casualties than companies relying primarily on rifles. The ability to suppress enemy positions with automatic fire before assaulting them saved lives. The 222nd Infantry Regiment fought from November 16th through December 4th without relief. Ernest Hemingway, embedded with the regiment, described conditions as Passchendaele with tree bursts, comparing the Hürtgen to the infamous World War I battle, where British and Canadian forces suffered 300,000 casualties gaining 5 miles. Colonel Charles Lanham commanded the 222nd. He watched his regiment disintegrate over 18 days of continuous combat. Replacements arrived and died within hours. Officers were killed faster than they could be replaced. NCOs took command of platoons. Private soldiers led squads. Through it all, the troops who survived were those who'd adapted to forest combat. That meant abandoning rifles in favor of automatic weapons whenever possible. It meant carrying more grenades than ammunition. It meant learning to fight at ranges where you could smell your enemy's cigarette smoke. On December 15th, the 222nd Infantry was withdrawn. Of the 2,800 men who'd entered the forest on November 16th, fewer than 300 walked out under their own power. The rest were dead, wounded, or missing. Colonel Lanham wrote in his final report, "Automatic weapons are essential for forest combat. Issue M3 submachine guns to every squad, 10 M3s per squad if possible. Rifles are nearly useless in this terrain." While American and German soldiers fought in the Hürtgen Forest, a different battle raged in factories thousands of miles from the front. Guide Lamp Division in Anderson, Indiana, produced M3 submachine guns, 24 hours per day, 3 shifts. Semi-skilled workers, many of them women who'd never worked in manufacturing before the war. They stamped parts, welded components, assembled weapons, and tested finished products. The assembly line could produce 1 complete M3 every 6 minutes. 10 per hour, 240 per day, 1,680 per week, more than 80,000 per year from a single factory. And that was conservative. The factory could surge to higher production rates if needed. The weapons came off the line, were packed in crates and shipped to port facilities. From there, Liberty ships carried them to Europe. The entire process from raw steel to weapon, in a soldier's hands, took approximately 6 weeks. In Germany, Irma Werke struggled to maintain MP40 production. Allied bombing had damaged machine tool factories. Raw materials were scarce. Skilled workers were increasingly rare. They were either in military service, working in higher priority industries, or dead. Production rates had dropped from peak levels in 1942 and continued dropping throughout 1944. By December 1944, Germany was producing fewer than 10,000 MP40s per month. That sounds substantial, until compared to American production of over 50,000 M3s per month, plus continued Thompson production, plus M1 carbine production. The numbers told the story. America's industrial base produced weapons faster than Germany could destroy them. Every M3 lost in combat would be replaced within weeks. Every MP40 lost might never be replaced. German soldiers in the Hürtgen understood this instinctively. They recovered and used captured American weapons because German supply couldn't keep pace with losses. American soldiers occasionally used captured MP40s because they were good weapons, not because they needed them. American supply was nearly unlimited. On December 16, 1944, Germany launched its last major offensive in the West. The Ardennes Offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, pulled German reserves away from the Hürtgen Forest. Units defending the forest were stripped of men and equipment to support the attack north. The pressure on American forces in the Hürtgen eased immediately. German counterattacks decreased in strength. Defensive positions were abandoned. By mid-December, American forces had broken through the forest and reached the Ruhr River plain. The battle was effectively over. American casualties totaled approximately 33,000 men. German casualties were approximately 28,000 for 50 square miles of forest, for terrain that had no inherent tactical value except as an obstacle. The Hürtgen Forest campaign is generally considered one of the worst American defeats of World War II in Europe. Poor planning, inadequate reconnaissance, misuse of forces, failure to recognize the importance of the Ruhr dams until too late, piecemeal commitment of units, all contributed to enormous casualties for minimal gain. But the campaign taught brutal lessons about weapons effectiveness. Rifles weren't enough for close-quarters combat. Automatic weapons were essential. The side that could equip more soldiers with submachine guns had overwhelming advantages in forest fighting. The M3 grease gun proved itself in the worst conditions imaginable. Mud, rain, freezing temperatures, constant use. The weapon kept working. Its crude appearance masked genuine effectiveness. Its low cost meant American forces could issue them widely without worrying about losses. German soldiers who survived the Hürtgen took away different lessons. They'd learned that American industrial capacity was essentially unlimited, that America could afford to build weapons Germany considered disposable, that the gap between German precision manufacturing and American mass production had become unbridgeable. The M3 grease gun served for decades after World War II. It saw action in Korea. It equipped American forces in Vietnam. Tank crews carried M3s into the 1990s, nearly 50 years after the weapon's introduction. This longevity seems paradoxical for a weapon designed to be disposable. But the M3's simplicity became an asset. Fewer parts meant less to break. Generous tolerances meant reliability in harsh conditions. The .45 caliber chambering meant commonality with pistol ammunition. The weapon was officially replaced by the M14 rifle in 1957. But that was theoretical. Actual M3 use continued decades longer, because the grease gun filled roles that rifles couldn't. Vehicle crew protection, close quarters combat, compact automatic fire. These missions didn't go away when new rifles were adopted. During Desert Storm in 1991, M3 submachine guns were still carried by some tank crews. 60-year-old weapons still functioning perfectly, still providing automatic fire when needed, still serving soldiers 3 generations after the men who'd carried them in the Hürtgen Forest. The German MP40 had a different post-war life. It was briefly used by police forces and border guards in divided Germany. It appeared in Cold War conflicts where German war surplus flooded black markets. But by the 1960s, most MP40s had been destroyed or relegated to museums. The difference in longevity reflected the original design philosophies. The MP40 was built to German standards. Excellent quality, limited quantity, requiring replacement when German industry could produce more. The M3 was built to American standards. Adequate quality, unlimited quantity, designed to outlast the war because simplicity meant longevity. Klaus Weber survived the Hürtgen Forest. He was captured in January 1945 during the American counteroffensive after the Bulge. He spent the rest of the war in a prisoner camp in France. In the camp, Weber worked in the motor pool, repairing vehicles. American guards carried M3 submachine guns. Weber asked permission to examine one. The guard was friendly and let him field strip the weapon. Weber had first examined an M3 in the bunker in November. Now, 3 months later, he understood what the weapon represented more clearly. It wasn't just cheap. It was a philosophical statement. America could afford to build weapons that barely lasted beyond the immediate need because American industry would simply build more. Germany had tried to match American production through the Volkssturm firearms program, crude, simplified weapons built in the final months of the war. But even German emergency weapons weren't as crude as the M3 because German engineers couldn't abandon quality standards completely. The psychology was too deeply ingrained. Weber returned to Germany in 1946. He went back to his machine shop in Stuttgart. For years afterward, he kept a photograph of the M3 he'd examined in that bunker. He showed it to apprentice machinists as an example of American pragmatism. They built this to win a war, he'd tell them. Not to last forever, not to be beautiful, just to be good enough, cheap enough, and available in quantities we couldn't match. That's why they won. The final statistics tell the story more eloquently than words. M3 grease gun production. Over 600,000 units in 24 months. Cost, $20.94 per unit. Labor, 5 hours per weapon. Materials, approximately $10 worth of steel and small components. MP40 production, approximately 1.1 million units over 60 months. Cost, approximately 150 Reichsmarks per unit, roughly $75 to $100. Labor, 20 to 30 hours per weapon. Materials, higher grade steel requiring more processing. American infantry companies in late 1944, 30 to 40 submachine guns per company, of approximately 200 men, one automatic weapon for every 5 soldiers. German infantry companies in late 1944, 10 to 15 submachine guns per company, of approximately 150 men, one automatic weapon for every 10 soldiers. In the Hürtgen Forest, where combat happened at 20 to 50 yards range, the Americans had double the automatic weapons density. That firepower advantage was decisive in close-quarters combat. But the real advantage wasn't just the weapons themselves, it was the industrial system that produced them. America could replace losses faster than they accumulated. Germany couldn't. That simple fact determined outcomes more than tactical skill, courage, or training. The M3 grease gun wasn't a better weapon than the MP40. It was a cheaper weapon, and in total war, cheap weapons produced in quantity beat expensive weapons produced in limited numbers. German Grenadiers, examining captured M3 submachine guns in the Hürtgen Forest, never knew the weapon cost just $20. They estimated 50 Reichsmarks, still cheap by their standards, but not inconceivable. The truth was worse. 20 American dollars. Less than a decent restaurant meal for 2. Less than a pair of boots. Less than a week's wages for a factory worker. For that price, American factories produced a weapon that fired 450 rounds per minute, worked reliably in the worst conditions, and equipped infantry for close-quarters combat where automatic fire meant survival. The MP40 cost more than 3 times as much and required 5 times as long to build. It was a better finished weapon, better looking, better feeling in the hands. But in the mud and blood of the Hürtgen Forest, finish quality didn't matter. What mattered was having automatic fire when you needed it, knowing your weapon would work when caked in mud, and understanding that if it broke, there were 10,000 more in supply depots. The M3 grease gun represented American industrial philosophy at its most pragmatic. Build it cheap, build it simple, build it fast, build millions of them. Let quality come from quantity. Win through logistics and production, rather than through engineering perfection. German soldiers learned this lesson the hard way. They'd been trained to value quality over quantity. They carried weapons that were works of craftsmanship. But craftsmanship loses to mass production in wars of attrition. The Americans could afford to throw away weapons that Germans would carefully preserve. That difference decided the outcome. $20, 450 rounds per minute, 5 hours of labor. Those numbers told the whole story of how America won the production war and ultimately the shooting war. If you found this story of industrial philosophy meeting battlefield reality compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to WWII Archives to stay connected with history that matters, the innovations, the production battles, and the tactical lessons learned in blood. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and which aspect of the M3 versus MP40 comparison struck you most powerfully. Thank you for watching, and for remembering that sometimes the crudest weapon wins because it can be everywhere at once.